And we are recording with the one and only, the photogenic, the handsome, the devil himself. And by that, I mean stunningly good looking, Dr. Ryan Cole on Monday, May 22nd, 2023. Dr. Cole, could you please introduce yourself while I rudely post a live link?
No problem, man. And thanks for that kind introduction.
Of course.
Yeah, I'm Dr. Ryan Cole, board certified anatomic and clinical pathologist, PhD research background in immunology, virology. Ran an independent medical laboratory, Cole Diagnostics, for 20 years here in Boise, Idaho. And I've been a voice for scientific truth and medical freedom. In spite of all the slings and arrows and attacks over the last couple of years, I'm just trying to help people and get the truth out. So happy to be on your show again, Tommy, and just go over any questions you have and go over some science and help people understand in a common sense way what's happening in the world.
Beautiful. So I saw a post about you. I think it was a couple weeks ago when I reached out to you. And I'd heard the term before, and I realized I'd never actually talked to you or anyone about it. But the term, which is seemingly, less than medical, but I think nonetheless it makes the most sense, is turbo cancer. Could you could you maybe elaborate on exactly what that is, aside from the obvious implications?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, it's kind of a layman's term that's really made the rounds around the world. I have a good colleague, Dr. Uta Kruger. She's in Sweden. And in terms of the harms of the COVID-19 injections, she was tracking things carefully. I've been obviously doing some research on the spike protein and what it does, as has she, with a group of pathologists out of Germany, Dr. Burkhardt and company. And I've become good friends with them over the last couple of years as we're all just trying to figure this investigational product out. She has been doing breast pathology for several decades, and she was noting after the rollout of the shots a big increase in breast cancer within the cohort that she sees through the microscope on a daily basis. And she was noting, oh gosh, I mean, the size of the tumors that she was receiving in the laboratory was at first presentation, a lot larger than normal. So, breast cancer may be a centimeter in size, and she was seeing, young women with cancers 3 centimeters in size. And then normally in medicine, we understand how cancer progresses over time. As a pathologist, we diagnose and we give, how severe is this cancer? How mild is it? How moderate is it? So we give a grade to the cancer in terms of appearance and its look of aggressiveness. And what she was finding in her patients was tumors were presenting at that most aggressive appearance and that most aggressive stage early. And then patients who had been cancer-free for 1, 2, 5, 10 years, declared cancer-free from their treatments, that'd been doing quite well. After the injections, all of a sudden their cancer was back, and not just back, but back with a vengeance. Stage 3, stage 4 on presentation. And then patients who had been cancer-free were presenting, with stage 4 disease all of a sudden. Now, the same thing was happening in individuals who had never had cancer, healthy athletes and just fit individuals who were presenting to their doctor with stage 4 cancer out of the blue. So this, that kind of explains this turbo construct, cancers that, again, normally you wouldn't expect within, certain age groups and populations, especially the younger population, just popping up all of a sudden. Now there's, we can go over a lot of the mechanisms as to why that's happening. But so that entered the zeitgeist. It made it into an article that she wrote, and then a lot of media sources picked up on that. It was kind of interesting. I was testifying in the European Parliament 2 weeks ago in Brussels with a lot of colleagues, Dr. Malone, Dr. Corey, Dr. Burkhardt, my pathology colleague, and there were about 20 docs from around the world that were there. But when I gave my presentation, I was discussing the mechanisms of cancer and these experimental injections. And I asked the room, I said, hey, who in this room, since the rollout of the shots, has a friend, a colleague, a family member, a patient who has a new onset cancer? more than half the room raised their hands. I mean, that room, there was 250 people, and it was just shocking. And I basically said, hey, let the record show this is not normal.
Hmm. And that's and there is a direct correlation to just the quantity and I guess the negative quality of them in age groups that wouldn't necessarily have them directly linked back to the rollout of the shot. That's
Correct. Yeah, and I've been following the work. There's a great researcher. He stays anonymous for very good reasons, um, as I've learned by not being anonymous.
yep.
Um, but he goes by the term the ethical skeptic, and he has a great website, theethicalskeptic.com. And so he goes in and breaks down the CDC data, and this is what all of our agencies should have been doing from day one. They should have been tracking the codes. When I make a diagnosis in the lab, we're required to use international diagnostic code, and doctors, when they see a patient in clinic, they use international diagnostic codes, and they're not used just in the U.S. They're used around the world. And so these go into databases, and health agencies, HHS and whatnot, track the trends. And it's the responsibility of the CDC in their morbidity mortality weekly report to report trends, be it in infectious disease, be it in cancer, any sort of disease. That's how we track societally what's happening. And it would be very easy for these governments to open up their databases and demand that these databases be regularly updated and we could track these trends. Well, this guy, the ethical skeptic, has been able to go in kind of through a back door into some of the CDC data and track the trends that we're seeing. So, you have typical year-to-year cancer trends, be it breast, lung, prostate, whatever, just very common. You can just look at it and say, okay, we're seeing a subtle increase in this type or that type or colon cancer, whatever. So he's gone in to look at the average trends, and then since and he looked at 2018 to 2020,
Hmm.
so we know the stable trends over that period of time, and then he took 2021 and then did the calculations up to the present, and you can see just this rapid rise, depending on age group, of rise in cancer over trend. And we're looking at 7 sigma trend increases, 12 sigma trend increases. We're seeing huge trend increases in many different types of cancers. And so he's saying, and I confirm, from what I've seen under the microscope, that this is an anecdote. And what changed in 21? Well, we all know what changed in 21. And so unfortunately, it's happening. And, but part of it is, and I'll allow doctors the excuse that during the pandemic, a lot of patients that normally would get screened, didn't show up for the regular visits and
Sure.
whatnot. So, that's a fair argument. However, when you look at the trend sets that he does, and you look at the age 0 to 54 age group, well, that's not a common group for cancer. And to see a 12-fold increase in the trend in that age group is massively telling. And so that's where, obviously as a pathologist, I was the first one in the world to call this out. When I noticed early on after the rollout of the shots, I was seeing some viral outbreaks that were unusual in older populations. So there's a little bump that kids get, this little, looks like a little white volcano called molluscum contagiosum. And a lot of kids will get that, from age 0 to into your teens, and then your immune system remembers it and your T cells fight it off if you ever get exposed again. Just, natural immunity to that little skin infection. But after the rollout of the shots, I started seeing these bumps in 80-year-olds. And then when it rolled out to the
Oh,
next decile lower, then I saw it in 70-year-olds, and then 60-year-olds and 50-year-olds. And I was seeing multiple fold increases. I mean, I almost never see this. And so I thought, we have T cell dysregulation. Well, what's the most important cell in your body to fight off cancer? Your T cells. And so there was a paper early that came out in 21 from a doctor named Dr. Fosse out of the Netherlands. And he said, hey, folks, after 2 shots, we're seeing this massive problem with your innate immune system. And your innate immune system is your first responders. It's kind of the Marines of your immune system. And he noticed a concerning pattern of reprogramming of the innate immune system. Basically, what that means is your T cells that know what to do all of a sudden don't know what to do. And you have these little receptors inside your cells called toll-like receptors, kind of like a toll road. And two of these, number 7 and 8, that are on the endosomes on the inside of cells, they're responsible for saying to your cell, okay, train the T cell, make sure they fight off this virus and that virus and this virus. And so, like Epstein-Barr virus and mononucleosis and shingles and things like that, all of a sudden after the shot rolled out, we saw increases in all of those. And then there's a couple other toll-like receptors that also program cells that fight off cancer in the body. Well, those were also altered in his study. And again, his line was a concerning pattern of reprogramming of the innate immune system. And then the other thing that was critically important in that study, we have a chemical in our body. We have a lot of different chemicals called interferons.
Mm-hmm.
And interferons are very important in all sorts of processes in the body. They're critically important in fighting off viruses for sure. And we know the spike protein, both the infection and the shots, that spike protein caused interferon to go down, which actually made people more susceptible to infection after the shots instead of less susceptible. But interferons also play a critical role in cancer pathways. And so to have that spike protein circulating in the body also suppressed interferon, again, suppressing the ability of the body to fight off cancers. And so there's, these are two of the many mechanisms. There's another paper by Dr. Singh et al. That came out showing that the spike protein, the S2 subunit, binds to two important genes in our body, the P53 gene, which we call the guardian of the genome, and then it also binds to the BRCA gene, which is known to be responsible in breast and ovarian cancers. So those are two more pathways. So what happened in the laboratory is, after I started seeing all these viral bumps, I did a fair amount of women's health biopsies, and year after year, especially after doing this for 20 years and hundreds of thousands of patients diagnosed, what your average patterns are. And all of a sudden I started seeing a bump in cancers of the uterus, and I'm like, what in the heck? And then you just kind of put two and two together and you realize, oh yeah, we have an immune suppressive product on the market that is allowing pathways that would normally be kept in check and suppressed to start taking off. And again, going back to my colleagues in Germany, Dr. Burkhardt, he and I have shared a lot of slides back and forth, over the internet. Just he'll stain tumors, I'll stain tumors, we'll stain autopsy tissues, et cetera, just kind of looking for the changes in the body. And what we're finding is persistent spike protein. There was a really good study by a researcher out of Stanford, Dr. Roltgen, and she showed that the synthetic mRNA, what most people hear, oh, mRNA, it's safe, it breaks down, goes away. What she showed is this, GMO, genetically modified pseudouridine, in this mRNA persists in the body for a long time. And in her study, it persisted at least 60 days. And there are other studies now that are out showing that the spike is still being made in the body of people for 4 months, 9 months, 12 months. And so these sudden deaths that are occurring long after the shot, you'll hear the authorities say, well, most deaths occur within the first day or two after a vaccine if the vaccine caused it. Well, these aren't vaccines, these are genetic products. So this persistence of this material within the cells, the immune suppression that they cause, can lead to these pathways over a long period of time. Fairly early on, I had a call from a radiology colleague after I had, announced, and of course got attacked by the media saying, oh, this is all impossible, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, well, come sit at my microscope and tell me I'm not seeing what I'm seeing. This radiologist calls and said, hey, I have, two 31-year-olds, both in one day after their booster. Well, I mean, both on the same day that he saw them, but several weeks after their booster, but two 31-year-old women, stage 4 breast cancer. He's like, I've never seen this in my career. And everywhere I go in the world, and I've traveled a lot, I've got about 400,000 miles behind me in just under 2 years now.
Good Lord.
I go, family docs, radiologists, oncologists, Like I'm seeing cancer at rates I've never seen in my practice. And it's just not normal cancers. That's the other concern I have is, these are unusual types of cancers that, again, are more aggressive, going back to, your question, turbo cancer. That's what we're
Hmm.
seeing.
And
So that's kind of the thumbnail of the story of what's happening.
now, if I'm if I'm a lawyer and it is I'm tasked with life or death to defend the other side, and that's what I'll do is I'll be a spineless prostitute lawyer. Is if I had to argue anything, and it's not what I believe, but if I had to, I would make a Hail Mary approach and say that this was caused by COVID. Something happened in COVID. I would chalk it up. I'd say it's a bioweapon. I would say it's Chinese bio, whatever. I would say something novel has happened with COVID. And although there was a massive vaccine rollout, there was also a massive pandemic. And these are two kind of unique things that happened very close to one another. We can't say one or the other caused it. Now, you could differentiate and say, well, let's look at the vax versus the unvax groups. But if I had to play devil's advocate with a gun in my head, that's what I would say. Now, I don't believe that, but just if I had to, that's what I would say. What would you argue against that with?
I would argue, to a degree, some of it is probably caused by COVID in some patients. However, in a natural infection, your body clears the virus within a week or two. If somebody's reasonably immune competent, the presence or the persistence of the spike protein in most of those individuals is gone very quickly. With the synthetic product and that persistence of the mRNA, and not only the mRNA, but that synthetic mRNA producing spike protein chronically over a long period of time, mechanistically, you can argue, well, it's in the patients, the majority is in patients, whether they were COVID recovered and their doctor duped them into getting a super immunity shot on top of their
Mm.
COVID recovery. You can, and to your point, there's 30% of the population that did not get these shots. And, the work of Dr. McCullough, it's stochastic. It seems to be a cumulative effect. The more shots you get, the worse off you tend to be, the more immune suppressed you tend to be. Again, this is up to our regulators to be honest, go into the databases. We look at the 30% of the population that never got them, look at the cancer rate, the cancer trends in that population, and then you go into the population and find out who got one shot, who got two, three, four, five, and then just by age decile, simply break down by cancer type. It would be a very easy statistical, obviously circumstantial evidence, but I will argue, and I'll bring up the ringer here. Dr. Burkhart sent to me an image, and I have permission to use his images and whatnot, and we share them back and forth. Shows me a lymphoma in the stomach, and went ahead and stained it for spike protein. Every cancer cell in that cancer was expressing spike protein, and
Ooh.
I have yeah, and then we stain them as well to make sure it's not virus. So to go against that devil's argument question, we can also stain special proteins to see, well, is the nucleocapsid of the virus there? Is the membrane present? Is there any virus present in these cells, or is it only spike protein? And what we're finding is it's only spike protein. So I have a cancer that I showed in EU Parliament of a gal that had received her third shot and shortly thereafter had an aggressive pancreatic cancer. And about 70% of the cells in that cancer are expressing spike protein and no other viral proteins. So the hard scientific evidence is starting to appear as well. And so, in a court of law, the more probable than not argument, now you can say, well, then somebody's going to have to come in and counter me and say, why is this protein, only this protein present, no viral proteins present? And then I was working with another pathologist out of the Netherlands in the EU and going back and forth on some new studies they're going to be doing. What we saw in some of those viral studies that happened, that like in shingles lesions, you could find spike protein, but you could also find the mRNA in the lesion. So now what we're doing and they're doing is we're going to start looking to see, is the mRNA present? within these cancer lesions as well. But not only mRNA, and this is really important because this has come out in the last couple of months. A phenomenal scientist, researcher, Dr. Kevin McKernan, and he worked on the Human Genome Project. Absolutely brilliant. I highly commend his Substack. I think it's called Anandamide. So he took a bunch of the vials and found out that both Pfizer and Moderna, not only, certainly they have the synthetic mRNA, but the technique they use to manufacture these products, they use E. coli, a bacteria, and then they're supposed to purify the mRNA produced by the E. coli and put it in the vials. Well, the E. coli also make these little circular DNAs called plasmid
Mm-hmm.
DNAs. And what he found is a high percentage of these vials have a lot of DNA in them, and not just synthetic mRNA. What does that mean? Well, in layman's terms, plasmid DNA can get into your gut, and these were antibiotic resistant genes that are in these, but they can also get into your cells, and then they can co-locate next to the nucleus of your cell, and then in theory and based on historical science, permanently become part of the nucleus of a
Isn't that
cell.
horizontal gene transfer?
Basically,
Isn't
yes.
that like relatively new in biology?
Yeah, in terms of researching it
Yeah.
and understanding, what it means, because it can even be passed on through sperm.
Yeah.
I have other slides showing spike protein present in placental tissues. I have slides showing spike protein present in the uterine lining. Dr. Burkhardt at a conference I was at in Stockholm showed abundant, I mean, I'm talking abundant spike protein present in the testes, both of a young man that passed away and of an elderly gentleman that passed away. So I kind of joke that unvaxxed sperm might be the new Bitcoin.
I'm banking on that, man. I'm banking on that. It's there's a severe conflict of interest. On one hand, I'm a God-fearing human who, loves the light and soul of God's perfect creation that is consciousness, and I want everyone to be safe. On the other hand, this podcast isn't really making money, but I'm not vaxxed, and I'm like, mm,
Hey, ladies, Tommy's a good-looking guy too. I don't know
I
if you got a girlfriend. I'm not saying
I'm
anything.
not. No, I'm not. And so I a very deep conflict of interest, and perhaps maybe I can have some empathy with the CEOs of Pfizer now because I'm actually starting to see that devil's temptation of a conflict of interest. I'm like, on one hand, I want people to be safe and not take a bioweapon product. On the other hand, I kind of want to get paid. So
Yeah, and that's the whole thing. I mean, even if they had just done a traditional protein injection, it wouldn't have worked either. I mean, historically,
still would have made their money.
yeah, it would exactly. It would have made them money. It
Which
would have still primed you for bad reactions down the road, immune enhancement reactions and whatnot. But it would have been safer than using an experimental, novel gene product on billions of humans.
and that's when and I always have to be careful with this and clarify that I'm speaking for myself. That's when you start looking at it and going, there are easier ways to make money, tried and true ways to make money.
I
There's
think I think you brought up last time. I mean, gosh, if they had just given everybody saline and everybody noticed it
it's
was safe, then everybody would have gotten one and nobody would have worried.
I used to go hang out with my little brother in college. He's a year younger than me. And there was this store in this college town of a pretty big public college. And it was the piano liquidators in a college town. And I remember the first time I visited him, he was like, what do you think about that? And I looked at it and I paused for about 20 seconds. I said, they're running drugs and or laundering money. He goes, yeah, we all think the same thing. I go, yeah, yeah, it's a piano liquidator store. At a certain point, you look at something on the face value and you stare at it and you go, what else is going on? What else is going? And now I don't know, and I don't claim to know. Something's odd. I don't know what it is. It could very. And I'm open to the idea that they were just trying to make money and it backfired so much worse than they ever thought possible. I don't know what it is, but it's so. It's one thing if you just guess every question on a test and you get like a 50. If you right, that's probably, if your Christmas tree is Scantron, you'll probably get like a 50. But man, if if you get like a 10% on a test, that's impressive because that means you have to know what the right answer was and not choose it, right?
Right.
When you get a 10 on a test, I'd start looking at it and going like, you're trying to fail. Like this is conscious and you're not stupid. You're actually intelligent. If you get a perfect 0, you're brilliant. That's kind of how I start to look. I'm like, it's so dangerous on so many fronts that I don't know what it is. And it's not some like I'm afraid to say what I don't know what it is. And that's just my own kind of intellectual, I guess,
The-
genuineness I have to give. It's like I don't know what it is, but it's
there,
something,
there,
man.
there's an easy answer of convenience.
Sure. Yeah.
In terms of, traditionally how, vaccines are manufactured, you have to keep the vaccine factories warm and running and predicting what's coming.
100%. Yeah.
And so this cold chain manufacturing, I mean, this is the supposed advantage of mRNA is you can quickly put a sequence in, quickly, produce your product. And so like, in Kenya, there's a new $500 million mRNA plant they're building. There's one in England, there's one in Canada, one in Australia. And so, the powers that be are pumping billions into building mRNA factories, though we have no long-term safety showing that these things are safe. And so like, the Pfizer RSV that just got, provisional approval, even though there was an increase in premature birth. And the FDA committee, again, just this rubber stamping up by these captured agencies, they're like, well, we'll just kind of monitor it post-marketing and see if we keep seeing this pattern. I'm like, you guys already see the warning pattern, you see the safety signal. It's as though there's nobody left with, yeah, well, even Peter Hotez, who is Mr. Pediatric Vaccine himself, said, guys, at some point we got to
Yeah.
step back. And I mean, he's as Mr. Vaccine as it comes.
Yeah.
He even said that this isn't making sense, guys. So, I mean, there's some degree of regulatory capture that's almost unconquerable, but you would think that some of these individuals would still have some morality or ethic left. When we saw two of the heads of FDA step down back in 21, they just said, "Look, yeah, we can't be part of this
Yeah.
anymore." I don't know. Again, when money is the driving force behind everything, and don't get me wrong, like you said, people got to make a living. I get that, but do it ethically, do it morally, do it with something that's going to be productive for society. It's a conundrum.
What I think it is, not that you asked, but I'll solicit it anyway. What I think it, and I've thought about it a lot. I don't, and I'm banned from YouTube and iTunes, so this isn't even like I'm being careful. I really don't think it's an intention. I've thought about it a lot. I don't think it's an intentional bioweapon or the vaccine that is or population reduction. Not and again, I'm not giving them any credit. Not that I don't think the powers that be would do that, but that's not at all it. I think they would do it in a heartbeat. I think you could do it more effectively and do it quicker. What I think it is I think that despite everything and despite hundreds of episodes I've done talking about just how dangerous it is, I do still think mRNA is probably the future. But I think it's the future and very much so that this rollout was kind of like I don't know, like the right flyer. And people with a brain are going, air travel is the future, man. It can't be steamboats forever. I don't want to get on this first gen plane, and I'm not going to fly them probably for another 30 years. Even at World War II propellers, you're going, oh, let's wait till the jet engine. The Nazis make the jet engine. You go, that one looks a little safer. I think this is the R&D, and I think they're rolling it out. And in time, we'll probably iron out the kinks. And in 100 years, we'll look back at it. And the same way, that the Chinese slaves we used to build the railways that went out west were bad. The way that we know, we used unskilled labor in New York to build skyscrapers and guys fell to their death all the time. It happened, but at the same time, you don't really think twice about it. The same way that child labor pushed the textile industrial revolution forward. And you look at it and you learn about it and you go, that's so sad. And then you just go about your day. I think in many ways, we'll probably look back in 100 years and go, oh, yeah, no, that initial rollout was bad. However, 5 rollouts later, we have perfected it. And now when there is a bioweapon or a novel virus, we have, it'll be so advanced that you can just 3D print your vaccine and take it much like you get an iPhone update. And that it might actually end up being a good thing, which is a very dark Machiavellian thing to consider, but that might be it.
Yeah, I mean, and I think that's a great assessment. I mean, I'm not saying throw the baby out with the bathwater.
Sure.
I agree with you in the sense that, when you have inborn errors of metabolism, and you do need to get a sequence into every cell so that those cells can now function normally. Great. Now that type of technology, lipid nanoparticle goes to every cell. Now, if we were able to say, okay, this virus comes in through the mucosa. We have receptors in this part of our body that we don't have elsewhere, and we can get this to only bind to where we want it to be, then that would be the end goal. And now, ironically, we're talking about cancer a little bit. Now Moderna and Pfizer are jumping on the bandwagon of, oh, we're going to use mRNA technology to cure cancers. It seems a little ironic,
Hmm.
but at the same time, to your point, very specific uses and very specific conditions, once you can control the product, and that's the big mistake we made scientifically around the world with this rollout, is we knew scientifically lipid nanoparticles would go any and everywhere in the body. Now they're rolling forward with other injections for other pathogens now. And my argument is until you can control that lipid nanoparticle, this is not a good platform. The mRNA itself, that synthetic mRNA, does it have human potential? Yeah, but it's time to go back to the benchtop and do all those appropriate animal studies and the long-term, again, mutation studies. Prior to this, some mRNA studies showed, look, there are some cancer, signals early on before COVID ever became a thing, and research in this area showed concerning signals because once you do put a gene product and any cell that becomes transfected with genetic material from something else now has the opportunity to mutate. So I agree with your overall Machiavellian picture and sense that in the long term, generation 5 or 6 or 10, maybe we'll get it right. But the answer isn't to do it to billions of people as the guinea pigs.
No, not at all. And I often on this podcast have to clarify there's a difference between what I think is right and what should happen and what I think is probably happening.
Well, and that's
Right.
the beauty of thought experiment.
Yeah.
Absolutely. It's
Yeah.
asking any and every question. And this is what should have happened in public forums between scientists like me and other scientists. We should have had these just open dialogues and conversations. Okay, what are the potential benefits? What are the potential bad outcomes? How do we do this appropriately in what age groups? And now that we knew the risk stratification, that we shouldn't have done this to everybody, and maybe it did benefit a handful of elderly people early on before everything started mutating. So having that thought experiment is absolutely critical, but having the dialogue and not censoring those of us that want to think differently. I mean, I joke, look, if you want to follow if you want to know the true science, follow the silenced. And
Oh,
that's
I
what's
like that.
and that's what's happened to you. It's happened to me and so many other colleagues that we're just trying to be voices of reason. And I mean, even the Roman emperors would, have a slave whispering in their ear, all glory is a fleeting thing. And so to historically think, look, your hubris is doing you no good because you too will go the way of all the earth. So to have ego about this and not keep humanity as your end goal and have empathy for those who might be harmed by, something experimental, it really diverges from where we should be as a human species and the way our thought processes would work in a decent manner as a society.
Well, and like all ego and hubris, it also brings up the thought of, yeah, but I'll do it differently. I'm not
Right, right.
dumb like every other emperor over every other century. No, I'll do it differently. And I mean, but not even going back to emperors. Let's just go back 80 years and look at the experiments that the Luftwaffe was doing, the ice bath experiments, the zero pressure experiments with human beings, the wind tunnel experiments with human beings, or Unit 731 in Japan, Shiro
Right.
Ishii, what the experiments they were doing there. I mean, what did we do with all of them? What did we do with the rank and file people? We hung them. What did we
Right.
do with the brains behind it? We brought him over to Fort Detrick, and that's just is what it is. Does that make it good? No. Does it make it evil? Yeah. World War II just finished. There's 85 million dead. I think there were probably some very callous generals that said, I think one of the quotes is there's no point in beating a dead Nazi horse. And another quote was along the lines of, the research is already done. Go get it. And does that
Yeah.
make it good? No, man. That is a dark conversation that you probably need a couple glasses of whiskey to even have. But the reality is we brought him back over here and we got a bunch of research that, though evil, is still based in reality. And I don't think it's right, but I think it's probably what happened and it's probably what's happening.
It is what's happening, and science, yeah, science without ethics is dangerous,
Demonic.
and God bless all those who ended up as a victim of all of this research and experimentation over the years. But history being a poem that rhymes with itself, it's certainly very frustrating to see that we didn't learn the lessons from World War II and human experimentation, and we're just willing to move forward. Be it the Faucis, the Collins, the Walensky's, et cetera, who just duped the people and allowed this to keep rolling forward. I mean, going to the cancer thing real quick. I mean, the NIH, there was a really good paper by Dr. Zhang et al. Out of Sweden that showed how this spike protein and these shots were causing the inability for T cells to repair DNA. Well, that same mechanism can happen in multiple cells in the body. And when you get a break in your DNA, either a cell dies or a cell mutates. Well, let's see, Eric Fried and Oliver, it's like Schlinger, there's 490 pages of communications showing from the NIH how these two individuals squashed this paper and got it retracted, even though it was good science, because they didn't want people to know that this DNA repair mechanism was being destroyed. And so 490 pages, and the NIH, through FOIA requests, won't release what they knew about the carcinogenic mechanisms and why they forced this paper to not be allowed to be in there for public consumption. So this same mindset from 80 years ago still persists. We're going to keep doing experimentation. If it harms someone, well, we're learning from it. Never mind the people we're harming. It doesn't make sense to me. I never want to be that kind of scientist. And I love the work of Jordan Peterson in terms of just, talking about, it was cool. I got to meet him last week. He was here
That's
giving a talk.
awesome.
Amazing guy. And I, got to chat with him for a few minutes backstage. It was really neat. But, how he talks about that, any of us could have become that complacent and complicit Nazi, any of us. And we all
Most
say,
of
oh, I
us.
would never do that. But checking our self and checking our ego and checking our motivations, we have to be able to say, I could potentially go there, and living life on a day-to-day basis such that one lives with the morality and ethic, saying, okay, I'm going to keep myself in check and stay aware and stay awake such that I don't allow myself to go down those pathways. How we got so many people complicitly involved over these last 3 years into this process, and just everybody, demonizing the unvaccinated or demonizing those that, wanted true informed consent and won't acquiesce to this insanity. It's fun to see these montages on the internet and Twitter now of, you know, we're not all safe until, all of you get the
Yeah.
shot, all those kind of things. It's really bizarre to look back now, but it's also critically important to look forward and not allow this to continue.
There's also just some like poetic truth to things like don't trust anyone over 30. When you see Rage Against the Machine requiring vaccine passports to get into their shows, or you see Howard Stern, before my time, but like to see him saying the military should go door to door and enforce, you really do see. I think some comedian said a couple years ago at the Super Bowl there was some Bob Dylan commercial about a Mercedes Benz, and it went, man, I bet every hippie watching that is saying, God, I wish I died of an overdose before I saw Bob Dylan sell Mercedes Benzes, right? That'd be like that'd be like seeing Jimi Hendrix alive today in a G6 private jet. You'd be like, what happened to like headbands and playing a guitar behind your back? There is something poetic about seeing rebels
Yeah.
turn around and say, you take this This go you take what big governments told you to do. It's insane. But also, we do what would I be in Nazi Germany? And I think I'm kind of, despite being censored and not making any money and being thrown into a corner of oblivion, I am proud that I kept doing these interviews despite being banned, and it's a great personal cost, social and financial. But at the same time, I am no better because I'm still using an iMac and an iPhone constructed by slave labor in China. And I don't even mean that as an edgy comment. I know full well they are. And I just shrug. I know it's bad. I know it's horrific. What am I realistically going to do? Nothing. I'll say a sentence about it on a podcast. And so, am I really any different?
It's
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 a
it's a
humbling thing,
conundrum.
man.
It's a conundrum of gradation and rationalization and justification. It really is. And to try to figure out, part of me would just love to be, a Luddite and live in a cabin in the woods
I would
and be,
love it.
part of me wants to do that. I do live close to nature here on my little organic farm and do my woodwork and farming just kind of as a release from all the chaotic world we're in. But I hear you. It's like, where do you make those decisions and cutoffs and yeah, where were the rebels? Where were the protesters? Where were the musicians? I mean, the guys like 5 Times August, he was great. Peter Conway over in the UK, Deepak. There were a handful of musicians that wrote the protest songs of COVID. A couple of cool rappers that did as well, but they were few and far between. And where's that spirit of rebellion and that spirit of independence? And it's really kind of mind-boggling how this massive psychological operation affected so many people worldwide. And we know, look, there were nudge units, there were brigades in Canada, brigades in the UK, military in the US using psychological
Hmm.
warfare against the American people and against the world. And but being brave enough to say, look, I do not consent, and having that dissenting voice and what you stood for truth over profit. And I think karma will pay back over time. I
I'm
think
banking on it.
I think you and I both are. But at the same time, knowing in your heart, look, hey, I did the right thing at that period in history. I can look back and say I wasn't willing to play the game, and whatever it is in the fiber of your soul and my soul and our colleagues, that made us realize early on. I wish we could find that and clone that and
I
inject a little
know.
bit of that back into humanity.
At the It does feel good, like morally, and I can sleep well. But on like a much simpler level of reality, it's also just so not cool to like go along with it. On like a very ego driven thing, it's like not badass. Like limited to like an I'm regressing to like an 18-year-old testosterone filled mind, but it's just really not like cool. Regardless of everything else, it's simply not cool. You're kind of a loser. If you just going back to just schoolyard bullying, you're kind of a dweeb if you push this thing.
Well, I love that you bring that up because there's a guy I like his writing, Charles Eisenstein. He has a good Substack too, and put a bunch of his Substacks into a book. But he talks about the abuser triangle, and you have the abuser, the victim, and the rescuer. And that bully is going to continue to bully until the victim stands up.
Yeah.
And then, unfortunately, so much of our society was waiting for a rescuer to come along instead of just saying, "Look, I'm just going to push back against the bully."
Yeah.
And the fact that our society has become so soft in that regard is concerning, going forward in terms of having a, a true republic, a democratic republic, and standing on the principles of rule of law and a true tricameral government, which we don't. And people allowed themselves to think, oh, my rights and my freedoms are just privileges. And it's not cool to acquiesce to a corrupt government and say, okay, yeah, you can treat my God-given rights and my freedoms and my constitution as though they're privileges. No, they're set in stone.
Yeah.
And to see an American people weakened and not being willing to say, my body, my choice, and no, I'm not going to be an experimental subject in your game. I don't know where we go from here, Tommy. I hope, people are waking up. Things are becoming
Mhm.
more common knowledge instead of private knowledge, thankfully. The truth is trickling out a little too late for a lot of people that can't wake up in the morning ever again.
Mhm.
And those who are now fighting off, the diseases we've been talking about and other things as well. But yeah, we're at an inflection point in history and in society.
If there's any silver lining from it, it's that it's almost poetic, but it is a lot like immunity. If it kills you, it didn't do you any good. If a disease kills you, but if it doesn't, and you do, get natural immunity, you are now stronger than you have ever been in your life. And that they didn't pull off global techno fascism. Like I think they really wanted to.
Oh, I agree.
They they took a shot at the president and they missed, which means you're screwed. You are at best going to be shot to death by the Secret Service. At worst, you're going to rot in a prison forever. They went for the they took they went for they went for the king and they missed. And at the very least, we can now all see what they were willing to do, the military psyops they're willing to do domestically, what they are willing to do in turning your neighbor against you, and to know that these people still exist that perpetrated this, and that they're probably going to try again in our lifetimes with something. I don't know what it will be. You can develop an immunity to that and go, yeah, maybe it's good to have alternative video platforms. Maybe it's good to stomp out censorship, smother in the cradle. You know, I think we might be in the we're still sick phase as a planet, but we might build an immunity from this, which would make us stronger than ever before. But we have to recover and actually work on it and be able to look at it in the future. I mean, when monkeypox came out, everyone and their brother was like, "The hell is this? Shut up! Will you shut up? This is a global. Shut up! You just changed the channel, right?"
Yeah,
But that wouldn't have happened without COVID. So
right.
that's if there's a silver lining, it's that.
Yeah,
That
I agree. I mean, I think a lot more people are awake now than were. So I think that is a silver lining, and I stay hopeful
you got
that
it.
as we continue to get the word out and continue to stand, if you look at a lot of people, we've been consistent for the whole time.
Yeah,
I think courage begets courage. And when one person stands up against a bully, other people realize, hey, that is a bully. I can stand up too. I can stand up
yeah,
too. So staying in that truth and staying in that consistency and learning as we go, but I think being kind as we bring people into an uncomfortable truth. Obviously, they have to go through all that cognitive dissonance, but once they join, what is it? The convert becomes the best apostle.
yeah. Sure. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
And it's not just the heretic, I've been a heretic all along, but I see some of my colleagues that did a 180
Yeah,
and now
most
like yeah, that those are the ones that, are really they're making an impact now. So I'm
yeah,
hopeful.
yeah, no, I mean, the most patriotic friends I have are, like, the immigrants from Eastern Europe,
You
right?
got it,
The
right?
evil Soviet. No, they're here and they're covered in American flags and right, almost obnoxiously, and it's like, yeah, it might be that. It might be that might be the best thing. So, I don't know, but, Dr. Cole, thank you so much for your time. I know it's a shorter episode than our last
All
one.
good.
I'd love to do a longer one. I love kinda going down the rabbit hole with you. I forget that you're also a history buff, so I
All
appreciate
welcome.
that. But
Indeed.
guys, if you want to go see more of Dr. Cole in the description are links to everything Dr. Cole. Thank you for your time, sir.
My pleasure, Tommy. Have a great one.
You too, sir. Thank